everyone. Shortly, we will be starting our webinar, File Cleanup, Defensible and Cost Effective. My name is Kaan Volkan. I am the Sales Enablement Lead for ZL Tech. So it's my job to research what's happening within the industry and come up with best ways to teach it to our people. And since that's my primary task to be a full-time teacher in corporate America, there are certain skills that you learn over time about what kind of methodologies work for learning and what doesn't. As it turns out, one of the most important things is how fast the speaker speaks. There are some studies on it, and you need to be speaking in between 60 to 120 words per minute. Now, this actually correlates perfectly with using a blackboard, but since I do not have a blackboard, I'll just be typing on Zoom. Another new research came out of the universities, and as it turns out, taking small 10-second breaks works like magic when you're trying to learn a new topic. As it turns out, your brain actually goes through everything you've heard up until that moment and just replays it at the back of your mind. Now, we will be having Q&A sessions. We'll be having it at certain points, and it will be highlighted at the top. Feel free to send in your questions to the Q&A. If you scroll, in my screen, it's up top. I don't know exactly where it would be in your Zoom, but feel free to send in any questions, and I'll be answering it during those Q&A moments. So with that, let's get started. So what's the real issue we're facing here with regards to file shares, right? And here's all the data we've managed to gather. They cost about $300 yearly for each user, and they have been growing at a rough rate of 49%. We estimate more than 60% of the data on these file shares to be raw, and your workforce spends a lot of time searching through this data. As it turns out, 5 hours searching minimum per week, that's a lot of time. And a lot of organizations, especially large enterprises, lose about 5% of their records, and each lost record costs about $170. And according to a recent cybersecurity survey, the cost of data loss or data leak has gone up by 10%. And right now it averages around $4.24 million in damage, right? So that's a lot of issues that we are facing. And the most frequent question we hear is, can the end user solve these problems, right? Can we rely on our workforce to overcome these issues? The most extreme example I've heard about relying on the end user actually comes from a firm in UK. And what they decided to do was make everyone in the workforce sign documents saying, in case of anything going wrong, you as the end user hold legal liability for any of the data that you put up there that's not working, right? That shouldn't have been there. And when I talk with the head of records management there, I asked them, hey, how's that working for you? And the answer is it actually is not working at all. And they are trying to shut down their file shares because even with such legal liability, the end users still keep on putting unnecessary documents there. They still pose extra risk. So at that point, it's quite clear that we need some tools, but picking the right tool can be a bit of a challenge, right? And that's what we're here for today. So here is actually a framework that you can use to figure out what kind of tool you want to buy. The first dimension we want to consider is functionality. And in here, the more functionalities you have, the more of a platform it becomes. If it only has one or two functionalities, we call that a point solution. Point solutions are great if you have a very specific need that you're trying to solve, but they don't really transfer, right? So if you got something for finding duplicates in your file shares, chances are it's not going to be that great at deploying records, declaring records, and making sure that the retention schema is working correctly. The second dimension we should consider is the data type. Here are some of the example data types. In case of file shares, we usually are talking about SharePoint, file shares, Box, Google OneDrive. And the more extensive the tool is, the more data types it can manage, usually the better it is. Because if you have tools that are deployed specifically on one of these, then you end up with silos, and silos are never fun to manage. The third dimension we will be looking at is processing depth. And this is, as it turns out, absolutely critical for long-term management. If you want a tool that you're going to use for the next 6 months to 2 years, then it's okay if it's not processing too deeply, right? You can just keep the processing at the metadata level and maybe some indexing. But if you're thinking about, hey, we want to set up our policies, we want thorough management, then chances are you want something that can process further deeper. And this is actually one of our content pieces that we'll be sharing on LinkedIn. If you want to grab this, it will be available on LinkedIn. And it basically summarizes what we talked about right now and gives a bit more in-depth explanation about how you can utilize this framework to pick your vendor, to pick the tool you want to use. Now, for what we're going to talk about today, which is the two approaches to cleaning up file shares cost effectively and defensively, here is what you are going to need from your tool. So you need some level of risk mitigation and records management. These two are absolutely critical for the success of your project. And a little bit of e-discovery. This becomes important as you start projecting things further and further, right? The more long-term you're planning, the more important it is that your tool is able to run some type of searches. Since we're talking about cleaning up files, right? SharePoint, file shares, and other file repositories such as Box is important to have. And for these two methods, actually what's the most critical is the processing depth. You really want a tool that can process as deeply as you would like it to process, right? So what's approach one? This is actually a use case from a top 5 bank. They wanted to do file management, ROT cleanup, and GDPR and CCPA compliance. They had over 200,000 employees, 3 petabytes of data, and if I remember correctly, they have about 50,000 file shares. And their biggest priority was minimizing risk cost effectively. So we recommended to them that they use a method called least processing. And in more basic English words, just use big buckets. So if you go into file shares, and this is a large bank, and these are unregulated file shares, we told them, hey, let's say you see a video that's 15 years old, and it hasn't been opened in the last decade. Chances are that's not really a valuable video since it's not in your records repository and it hasn't been accessed in a long time. So you don't actually have to go into the video, process it further, watch it, look at the transcription, and make a decision. You can just say, chances are this is trash. And you can use this method with pictures or any kind of large items, right? And this has helped them to reduce their costs quite considerably. And here's actually another way of looking at the same paradigm, right? They had 3 petabytes of unknown. And in the initial pass, they just looked at things that are obviously rot or obviously records. And as they kept on going, they just kept on analyzing it more and more using these large buckets. And at some point, you're left with this in middle section where you're not quite sure what to do with it. With finance industry, they're quite used to 7-year retention schemas. So we said, hey, why don't you use that same schema for the rest of the documents you have there? Just apply it as this will be deleted if it hasn't been opened in 7 years. Now, the beauty of having a very deep processing capability is you can actually go ahead and do some further processing to minimize this part in the middle. So they actually started by deleting about 10 to 15% of their data from their file shares, but their end goal is to get to 80% by the end of 2028, if I remember correctly. And the more they process, the more they're able to minimize this middle section. And this would be a great time to ask any questions you have. This is also that 10-second break where our minds will reprocess. All right, looks like we don't have any questions so far, so we will keep on going ahead. Now, the second approach, this was with a major retailer. Their use case was divestitures, and they're one of the top 3 retail manufacturers. They had over 100 terabytes of data, and they wanted to make sure that only the correct data went to the company that they were selling, right? And this, at a first look, doesn't look a lot like something a records manager would work on, but the more you dive into it, what we realize is they were actually coming up with brand new lexicons and classification rules. So this major retailer actually pulled in all of their records managers to start working on this, right? So what we recommended them was, hey, start slow, take your time, right? You already know your sources. You've already identified them. You have 6 months before the end of the divestiture. Spend vast majority of that time analyzing the data you have. Go in there, start tagging things, start very slow, start with the most obvious tags, and spend 80, 90% of your time doing the analysis. Once you feel comfortable enough, then go on to the next step, which is taking action, right? Could be deleting, could be putting it into a records repository, or in this case, it was divestiture, so they moved their data. And in more English terms, this is actually how it really happened. They started with about 500 tags. These were the most obvious tags. And after going to 500 tags, they realized, hey, we still need a lot more. And over the next 6 months, they actually went up to 6,500 tags. Now, once they have tagged all of the documents they have, the next step they took was, let's look at some of the patterns. Let's look at documents that have 2 tags. Let's look at documents that have 3 tags, so on and so forth. And let's see what kind of patterns we observe. And based on those patterns, we can start making some decisions, some judgments, right? If it has these 3 tags, it should stay with us. If it has these 6 tags, then it should go to the company we're selling off. And with this, they actually were able to separate their file share into 2 clean chunks without having almost no documents spill over. So this was quite a successful project for us working together with them. Here's our second Q&A. Well, going ahead. So I want to talk a little bit about what we offer as ZL Tech. Over the last 2 decades, we focused on trying to cover as much of this evaluation as possible. And the beautiful thing about our offerings is you actually get to cherry pick what kind of combination you want. So if you say, hey, I want to deploy only on SharePoint, but I want full functionality and I want full processing depth. We say, that's perfectly fine. Let's go ahead and do it. Or you can say, hey, I want to deploy this platform across all of the data types we have on our company, and we just want to do records management. And we say, hey, we're able to do that too. Right? And this is actually something quite beautiful. We really recommend starting a project with us on your file shares and shared files. So start small, start with file shares that are rather easier to take care of, to control, right? It's a light project, light deployment, rather fast. Next step is do some reactive discovery. This is as easy as just setting up connections, and that's about it. And for more litigated industries, we say then go into more proactive discovery, where you're selectively archiving data from these platforms and making it searchable. Next, add records management, because now you have a lot of data and you for sure don't want to keep it long term, definitely not longer than needed. And add privacy, because as it turns out, records and privacy go hand in hand. If you want to learn more about that, you can always reach out to our teams. Then compliance usually becomes the next step in this progression, and top it off with analytics. And once you have all of this under management, all of your data under management within a single platform, what you can do is you can selectively start connecting it to external systems. Could be your analytics systems, could be other e-discovery tools. We hear about Hadoop quite frequently. And the beautiful thing of this approach is once you start, working on your file shares, which we usually call the corporate dumping ground, most organizations say, hey, let's just clean it up once. But that's usually not enough, because data starts piling up again. So you have to clean it up again. And then it just piles up, piles up, piles up. What we can do with this kind of platform and deployment is we start by cleaning up your file shares once. And on the next step, what we do is we are able to apply governance because of the depth of ingestion we provide, the processing we provide. And once you apply governance, once you minimize that middle section to as small as possible, right, you actually never have to repeat this cleanup process again. And if there are any kind of changes in litigation, regulations, whatever have you, since you have a unified platform that has a deep ingestion module, you're actually able to search by the changes. Let's say, and we've seen this quite a lot with privacy. When privacy laws passed, a lot of our competitors were saying, oh, we're in big trouble because we were not looking at patterns that captured PII, right? So now we have to go back to the beginning of the project, to the cleanup, to whatever you wanted to do, and start all over again, because we don't know where the PII lies. Whereas most of our clients were quite happy because the system had already recognized the PII patterns. So all they had to do was just run a search, create a new library, create a new section of their library, and say, hey, this is where all the PII goes. And if it need be, we'll just purge it. That's pretty much the end of this session. I know we scheduled for an hour. If you have any further questions, I'll be here for the next 5 minutes. But if not, you will be getting an email about this recording, and the content we have, parts of it will be shared on LinkedIn. So feel free to go and give us a follow there. Thank you for joining. We got a question whether the presentation will be shared. Not in the email. You will get a link to the recording of the webinar, basically, instead of the deck. But if you would like to receive the deck, you can always send me an email. My email is kvolkan@zlti.com, and I can always forward you the deck itself. The evaluation framework will be available on our LinkedIn page, though, if that's what you're looking forward to. Well, Melanie, let us know if I can help in any way. Uh, we have a lot more information on these projects. We just wanted to keep this rather short to respect everyone's time. So yes, please. Well, with that, have a great one. We'll see you soon.